A Trip into the Darkness, Chapter 6. The last 24 hours had been exceedingly difficult for Troy. He had multiple business calls to attend to, and the issue of an upsent clientele involving the release of his company's latest drug. His pharmaceutical test lab, located in Cleveland, Ohio, had been working on developing a synthetic drug which would help arthritis patients manage their pain and gain full mobility back in their weak bodies. The drug had been out for its trial run after a year of laboratory testing and was causing customers some serious problems. Troy was beside himself with how this had happened, considering his labs were very thorough in their testing, and there had been positive results in the test subjects. Troy's labs were excellent in delivering drugs that were safe for human consumption. A good reason for this relates to the fact that the drug developed in his lab are first tested on human subjects before being released to the public. It was a very illegal practice and unethical business of acquiring people who fit the description of needs without anyone noticing their disappearance. Sometimes the test subjects were found on the streets living the homeless life, and other times they were prisoners who were serving life without parole. It's ridiculous how easy it is to buy someone if you have enough money. For medications involved with mutations or fixing issues that were sustained from trauma, his company would often turn towards the United States military to obtain subjects. Their lives technically belonged to the government where they were serving, and in theory, the government had every right to sell their people if they saw it fit. After all, the people obtained for these tests were serving a greater purpose than their meek lives could ever achieve. When his father came to America with him and his mother in 1944, he had a dream to continue the research he had started while in Germany with human lab testing. He stated that there was no better way to ensure a product was good and profitable without first testing it on the intended future clientele. Of course, you could not test it on people who would be noticed or who had a voice to speak out if they had negative reactions. For this, you needed pawns. After a pawn had served its purpose, it would need to be disposed of. The goal of these labs is to create synthetic drugs that mask individuals' health problems. A side effect of these drugs often results in other health issues that require different pharmaceuticals. The key was never to cure a disease or eliminate it, because then the pharmaceutical companies would be losing money. So instead, he, along with his business partners, looked to find ways to lure people into believing that they were making them better. That is a hard line to walk. To keep money coming in, you have to keep the person alive for as long as possible while keeping them sick enough to keep taking their drugs and buying their product. It's a game of ensuring lifelong customers. Granted, the astronomical amount of chemicals and toxins pumped into human foods, cosmetics, water, air, and everything else works wonders for keeping the human population sick enough that they must have pharmaceuticals to survive. It is a sick, twisted world and a nasty cycle. Troy took a drink from his glass of bourbon and exhaled a long breath. Currently, he was seated in his den, rewatching footage of his pet. He hated that he couldn't watch her live, but business must always come first. She was a feisty little thing, full of anger and life. She took quite a while to calm down after she had first awoken and realized her situation. The way she had flown off the bed and immediately started screaming and slamming her fists on the door had brought a chuckle from his lips. The cameras were installed in the safe room around the same time he had added the rugs and bedding. At the time of installation, he wasn't sure if he would have any use for them, yet he had heard others in the industry having similar rooms where they would watch their own pets. Out of curiosity and in hope that someday he too would find someone, he had them installed. At this moment, he couldn't have been happier with that decision, as he watched her go through emotion after emotion. For nearly 20 minutes, he watched her have a tantrum at the door. He decided that she must have worn herself out, because as suddenly as she started, she stopped and just stood there wide-eyed and quiet. If he hadn't seen her chest moving, he would have feared that she died while standing up because of how still she became. He wondered what she was thinking. How could she go from raging to complete silence and stillness? He would assume that she would start crying at this point. Instead, he watched her eyes narrow before she started searching the room. It was amusing watching her try and pick up the metal chair only to discover it was bolted to the floor. His father had ensured that nothing in that room could be used against him. He wondered if his father would have also watched his mother this way if cameras had been around when they were both still alive. His father considered himself a busy man, so Troy doubted he would give his wife this kind of attention. As a child, Troy would often sneak down to the basement to try and check on his mother. However, the door was always locked and the room was completely soundproof. There were times he would just sit outside the door and pretend that she was sitting behind him on the other side. He was so lonely whenever his mother was locked away in that room, and he resented his father for taking her away from him. As the memory faded, Troy refocused his attention on the two large computer screens in front of him. Mallory wasted no time abandoning the chair when she realized it wouldn't move, and started next with destroying her bed and throwing the rugs around like they were garbage. He had hoped she would like those rugs. He wondered if she would bother putting the room back together after her search was out of her system. He hoped she wouldn't, that way he could punish her for acting like a child. Abandoning the bed, she was off to check the walls and finally the toilet and the shower. She has a lot of built-up anger, Troy thought as he watched her kick the toilet and yank on the shower head. He felt a pang of regret when she drank straight from the bathtub like she was dying of thirst. Perhaps he should have left her water, but obviously she was resourceful. That was a good quality to have. Once her search was over, she was back to screaming and slamming her hands on the door, only this time she brought her opinions out on the situation. Such a dirty mouth on such a pretty girl. She had better not think she was going to talk to him like that in person. The fact that she thought she could get away with saying those things when he wasn't in the room was also inappropriate and would have to be addressed. Troy would not tolerate that kind of disrespect and disobedience. The ache in his pants told him that he secretly loved her temper. He wanted to march in there right now and grab her by the throat so he could teach her a lesson or two. Reaching down, he adjusted himself to allow for the swelling. He would need to change her soon so he could handle her the way he wanted without worrying about accidentally killing her. He had ensured his bloodlust was taken care of before coming to his den a few hours ago. He had also gone back to her apartment earlier this evening to see what he would find. The complete chaos littering her pitiful apartment had put him on edge. What creature could live that way? There were clothes scattered in every possible place he could imagine. Her refrigerator was completely empty, except for a couple apples and some sparkling water. He found an almost empty bottle of vodka on her counter with 2 shot glasses. One of the glasses had a musky scent, which meant a male had been in her apartment with her. The anger he had felt was immediate. Storming over to her bed, he found the same male scent on one of her many pillows. Hissing, he threw the pillow back on the bed and focused on settling his rage. He hadn't been surprised that she had recently had male company, but he was still not happy about it. After he had calmed himself down, he decided he would make her tell him the name of who was last in her apartment, then take his anger out on him. Watching him bleed for his sins would be very satisfying. Moving away from the bed, Troy had stopped to examine the multitude amount of books that had piled up and were scattered everywhere. His pet liked to read. He could remember his mother often reading classic love stories. His father had told her that she should stop reading her trash and do something more productive with her time. This would often lead to a fight between the two of them and result in him lashing out. He had threatened to burn her books many times, but he never did. In some twisted way, his father had loved his mother, even if he hadn't known how to show it. Reading some of the titles of Mallory's books, he found that she not only enjoyed romance novels, but had a slew of other topics as well. That was interesting. Shifting through the piles of papers and books, he found a degree in English she had received from Toledo University. He also found an acceptance letter to a master's program at Ohio State. A female with this amount of knowledge was a waste. There was no reason for it, in Troy's opinion. She would never need to use this expertise, but perhaps he could give her a book or two if she was good. He also found an assortment of rocks, dried weeds, and plants scattered around her apartment in random places. There was a stack of pine cones on her kitchen counter along with a bird's nest. In her bathroom, he found a mason jar full of seashells. He wondered if she had found those things on the ground and just decided to bring them all home with her. He wasn't certain why anyone in their right mind would feel a need to collect this stuff, Books and pieces of nature. What an odd combination. Besides her abundance of dirty clothes and books scattered everywhere, her apartment was rather clean. There were no dirty dishes except for those 2 shot glasses. No actual trash anywhere unless you count the feathers and weeds. Even her counters and tables were freshly wiped down. He found a laptop along with more books on her kitchen table. He had thought about taking the computer, but decided against it. He felt he had learned enough about his pet without taking anything. If anyone showed up looking for her, it would simply appear that she vanished. Taking the last drink of his bourbon, Troy sat down his empty glass on the mahogany desk, which housed the computer screens. He fast-forwarded the footage of Mallory, finding her sitting on her bed, staring at the empty chair. After hours of simply pacing the room, she finally decided to put the bed back on the frame along with the bedding, though she hadn't actually made the bed, but simply threw everything on top of it. She had even thrown the rugs back in the general area they belonged. She hadn't bothered with fixing the towels, but her efforts seemed to show that she had come to some kind of acceptance. With that thought, Troy smiled and decided it was finally time he introduced himself to her.